You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis on this show, there's this expectation of just extreme precision. Like it feels like engineering, right? You break your arm, the X-ray spits out that black and white image with a jagged line, and the doctor just points at it and says, "Yep, there it is. That's the problem."
Right. It's highly binary. Like
Right.
it's either broken or it's not. You have the specific biological marker for the disease, or well, you don't.
And it's comforting. I mean, we desperately want things to be visible and, neatly categorized. It gives us this illusion of control over the absolute chaos of human biology. But the moment you step out of that pristine, temperature-controlled hospital environment and into the actual reality of a global health crisis, the entire paradigm just shatters.
Oh, absolutely. It completely falls apart.
Because suddenly, that X-ray machine is broken,
Yeah.
or the power grid went down, or maybe the hospital is a 3-day walk across a desert, and it basically never existed for these patients in the first place. You are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is just the absolute definition of muddy waters.
Yeah. And when you are dealing with millions of lives spread out across these remote, deeply under-resourced villages, the tools of precision medicine, I mean, the blood panels, the imaging machines, they simply cannot reach the people who need them most. You have to navigate those muddy waters with an entirely different compass.
Right. And today, we are going on a deep dive into a system that completely re-engineered how we fight a disease that affects an unimaginable number of people. We're talking about a massive global health crisis, one that contributes to, well, hundreds of thousands of child deaths every single year.
It's a staggering scale.
It really is. But what is so captivating about this story and why we wanted to bring it to you today is that this crisis is being fought and beaten not with high-tech hospitals or million-dollar MRI machines. It is being fought with a simple color-coded piece of plastic, packets of peanut paste, and the mobilized power of local mothers.
Yeah, it's a profound shift in how we deliver healthcare.
Exactly. So our source material today is a really comprehensive 2018 training guide. It was developed by the Food and Nutrition Technical Assistance Project, which is known as FANTA, alongside USIA. And it outlines a framework called CMAM, that stands for Community-Based Management of Acute Malnutrition.
And to truly grasp the stakes of this framework, we really have to look at the baseline numbers the source material provides. Because in 2017, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and the World Bank estimated that over 50 million children under the age of 5 suffered from wasting globally.
Wait, 50 million?
Yes, 50 million. And wasting is a highly lethal acute form of malnutrition. Out of those 50 million, over 16 million were classified as severely wasted.
Oh my God.
Right. We aren't talking about kids who are just a little underweight here. We were talking about an immediate life-threatening physiological collapse that, well, prior to the CVAM model, was completely overwhelming the traditional healthcare infrastructure in many developing nations.
I mean, 50 million children, I try to hold that number in my head and it just breaks my brain. It's the population of a massive country entirely made up of starving toddlers. It's horrible.
It is. It's an absolute catastrophe.
But before we get into the cure, and the incredible system design of this CM revolution, we have to define the disease itself. Because honestly, looking through the source material, I realized I had this completely wrong. I hear the word malnutrition and I picture a generic image of a hungry child. But undernutrition is a massive umbrella term, isn't it? Like the medical community splits this up very specifically.
They have to, yeah. Because the physiological mechanisms, and therefore the actual treatments, are entirely different. The training guide categorizes undernutrition into 4 distinct forms. First, you have micronutrient deficiencies.
Okay, so that's like vitamins and stuff.
Exactly. It's a lack of essential vitamins and minerals, like vitamin A, iron, or iodine. So a child might actually consume enough calories. They might not look starved, but they are lacking the biochemical building blocks for a healthy immune system or proper brain development.
Right. Hidden hunger, basically.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Second, there is the category of underweight, which is really just a composite indicator. It means a child weighs less than the average for their age, but it doesn't tell you why they weigh less.
Right. It's just a data point on a chart. It doesn't give you the mechanism.
Exactly. It's not a diagnosis.
Yeah.
The third category is stunting, and the fourth is acute malnutrition. And acute malnutrition is the primary target of the CMAM model.
Okay, so I'm looking at those last two, stunting and acute malnutrition, and I'm genuinely confused because to a layperson listening to this, a stunted kid and an acutely malnourished kid both just sound like, well, children who aren't getting enough food. Why does the medical establishment split hairs over this distinction?
Well, it's because the biological timelines and the immediate threats to life are worlds apart. Stunting is chronic undernutrition. Medically, it is defined as a low height for age.
Right, for age. Okay.
Right. This is a result of prolonged, repeated episodes of poor nutrition, and it often actually begins in utero. If a mother is undernourished, the child is born with a deficit. And then if that child lives in an environment with poor sanitation, they're constantly battling these low-grade intestinal infections that prevent nutrient absorption.
So their body basically has to make a choice.
Yes, the body makes a biological calculation. It slows down bone growth to conserve energy for vital organs. So over years, this stunts the child's physical height and, tragically, their cognitive development as well.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to see if I'm getting this. So stunting is essentially like a tree growing in poor, rocky soil. It might survive for decades, but because the environment is perpetually lacking, it's never going to reach the canopy, like it's chronically held back. But acute malnutrition, that sounds like a sudden, devastating drought that hits the forest and immediately threatens the survival of the tree right here, right now.
That is a really highly accurate way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Acute malnutrition is caused by a sudden, drastic decrease in food consumption or a severe, sudden illness, like a bad bout of malaria or severe diarrhea that rapidly drains the body of fluids and nutrients.
So it happens fast.
Very fast. It is defined not by height, but by a dangerously low weight for height or a critically low mid-upper arm circumference. And the reason this distinction matters so much to global health policy is the mortality risk.
Because stunting affects way more kids, right?
Hundreds of millions globally, yes. But acute malnutrition carries an immediate death sentence if it's left untreated. The data shows that severely wasted children are 3 to 9 times more likely to die than well-nourished children. If a sudden drought is killing the tree today, you don't worry about whether it will grow tall in 10 years. You have to water it right now.
Right, you have to put out the fire. That brings us to the physical reality of the disease. And I have to say, for anyone listening, the descriptions in the source material of how severe acute malnutrition, which they call SAM, actually presents in the human body are just haunting. It basically manifests in 2 very different ways, right? Marasmus and kwashiorkor. Can you explain what is actually happening inside a child's body when they develop marasmus?
Yeah, so marasmus is what clinicians call severe wasting. It is the physiological endgame of starvation. When a child stops receiving enough calories, the body initiates this ruthless survival protocol. Once the liver's glycogen stores are depleted, blood sugar drops.
And the brain needs sugar to run.
Exactly. To keep the brain and heart functioning, the endocrine system shifts gears. Insulin levels plummet, and stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine spike. The body begins to cannibalize itself. It starts breaking down its own fat reserves for energy.
And when the fat is gone?
Once the fat is mostly gone, it turns to the muscles. It literally breaks down muscle tissue into amino acids to be converted into glucose.
So it's literally consuming its own architecture just to keep the lights on.
Yes, that's exactly what it's doing. Visually, the child becomes incredibly thin. The guide notes that they lose the buccal fat pads in their cheeks, which gives them what doctors describe as an old man face. You can trace every rib, every contour of the shoulder bones.
It's just skin and bones.
And in extreme cases, because the fat and muscle beneath the skin have completely vanished, the skin around the buttocks hangs loose, creating this heartbreaking baggy pants appearance. Behaviorally, these children are not crying or thrashing. They are profoundly apathetic and lethargic because they simply do not have the caloric energy to expend on emotion or movement.
It's a system powering down, just a total shutdown. But then you have kwashiorkor, which seems to present almost the exact opposite physical symptoms to the point where I imagine it's incredibly confusing for an untrained observer on the ground.
It is deeply counterintuitive. So kwashiorkor is characterized by bilateral pitting edema. Edema means swelling. So instead of looking like a skeleton, the child actually looks swollen and puffy.
Wait, okay, I have to stop you there. Why would a starving child swell up? If they have no food and no water, where is the fluid even coming from?
It's a complex metabolic failure. It's primarily driven by a severe lack of protein and antioxidants, coupled with the stress of an infection. So when a child's diet is desperately low in protein, but perhaps still has some carbohydrates, like a diet entirely reliant on cassava or maize, the liver fails to produce a vital protein called albumin.
Albumin, okay. What does that do?
Albumin normally circulates in the blood and acts like a sponge holding fluid inside the blood vessels. When albumin levels crash, that oncotic pressure drops, and the fluid literally leaks out of the blood vessels and pools in the surrounding tissues.
Oh, wow. So they are retaining fluid in all the wrong places. It's just leaking out of their veins.
Precisely. And gravity takes over. The swelling usually begins in the feet and ankles, but in severe cases, it progresses up the legs, into the hands and arms, and eventually the face, creating a swollen, rounded look known as a moon face.
That is horrifying.
It is. And furthermore, the lack of nutrients destroys the integrity of the skin. They develop dermatosis. So their skin might flake off in large patches, losing pigmentation, leaving raw, open sores that are highly susceptible to infection. And behaviorally, unlike the quiet apathy of marasmus we talked about, children with kwashiorkor are often in severe pain from the swelling and the skin lesions. They are highly irritable and cry almost constantly.
And the manual mentions a child can actually suffer from both simultaneously, like at the exact same time.
Yes, it's called marasmic kwashiorkor. It's the absolute worst-case scenario. The child has the profound muscle wasting of marasmus hidden underneath the dangerous leaking fluid retention of kwashiorkor. Their mortality risk is just astronomical.
Okay, so we have this devastating, highly lethal condition, kids whose bodies are literally eating themselves or swelling with trapped fluid. Prior to this 2018 manual, prior to the early 2000s, how did the medical establishment try to fight this? Because the source goes out of its way to outline how the old way of doing things was just fundamentally broken.
The old paradigm was entirely centralized and hospital-based. The prevailing medical logic was that severe acute malnutrition is a complex metabolic crisis, which, it is, and therefore it requires intensive 247 medical supervision.
Right, that sounds logical.
Sure, if a severely malnourished child was identified in a village, the protocol was to admit them to an inpatient facility. They would be sent to a therapeutic feeding center or a hospital's nutrition rehabilitation unit. And the child and their mother would essentially have to live at the hospital for 3 to 6 weeks until the child regained enough weight.
I mean, on paper, if you're sitting in an office in Geneva or Washington, D.C., that sounds like the most responsible policy, right? You have a sick kid, put them in a hospital bed with doctors and nurses.
On paper, it is the highest standard of care. But you have to place that policy in the context of rural sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia in the 1990s. When you mandate inpatient care for millions of cases, the logistics immediately collapse.
Why? What happens?
Well, first, consider the geography. A centralized hospital might be 50 miles away from a rural village. There are no paved roads, no ambulances. A mother has to carry her dying child for 2 or 3 days on foot just to reach the doors.
And if she does make it, what does she actually find when she gets there?
She finds a ward designed for 20 beds crammed with 60 children. The capacity is instantly overwhelmed. The medical staff are completely exhausted. And putting 60 immunocompromised, severely malnourished children into a single crowded room is an epidemiological nightmare.
Oh, because of the disease spread?
Exactly. Cross-infection was rampant. A child might come in to be treated for malnutrition and die because they caught measles, or a severe respiratory infection from the bed right next to them.
And think about the agonizing choice it puts on the mother. If she has to walk 3 days to a hospital and then live there for a month, she basically has to abandon her life. Who is tending her crops? Who is fetching water? What happens to her 4 other children back in the village?
Right, the opportunity cost was devastating. And because the journey was so grueling and the social cost was so incredibly high, mothers would understandably delay going to the hospital until they had exhausted every traditional remedy in their village.
So they wait until it's almost too late.
Yes. They waited until the child was actively dying. By the time they arrived at the inpatient center, the child was in such critical condition that the mortality rates inside the hospitals were terribly high. It created this massive, vicious cycle.
Because the village sees people go to the hospital and die.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Mothers saw that kids who went to the hospital often didn't come back, so they lost faith in the hospitals entirely, leading to later admissions and even higher death rates. The system had terrible geographic coverage, massive default rates where mothers would just leave early because they had to get back home, and it was incredibly expensive to run. It just could not scale.
So the system is failing. It's totally broken. Enter CMM, Community-Based Management of Acute Malnutrition. The core philosophy here is a massive decentralization, right? Take the treatment out of the overcrowded hospital and push it as far down into the community as humanly possible. Bring the cure to the dirt roads, to the local health post, directly into the mother's home.
That's the vision.
But to pull that off, you can't just change the rules. You need a completely different kind of medical technology to make that viable.
Right, and to understand the technological leap, you have to look at what was literally tying patients to those hospital beds. Traditionally, severe acute malnutrition was treated with therapeutic milks. The World Health Organization had developed two formulas, F75, which was used to stabilize a fragile metabolic system, and F100, which was a high-calorie milk used to rapidly pack on weight.
Let me guess. Milk powder requires water to mix it.
Exactly. They are water-based. In an inpatient setting, a nurse can boil water, sterilize the plastic cups, mix the milk powder safely, and feed the child. But imagine discharging a mother and handing her a tin of F100 milk powder to take back to her village.
A village without a sanitized kitchen, without refrigeration, and where the local well might be, contaminated with agricultural runoff or human waste.
You are handing her a death sentence. If she mixes that nutrient-rich milk powder with unboiled water, or stores the mixed milk in a warm hut for a few hours, it becomes the perfect incubator for bacteria.
Oh, wow. So it just grows pathogen.
Rapidly. The child drinks it, contracts a severe diarrheal infection, and their already battered system simply shuts down. The water requirement was the hard barrier preventing decentralization.
So the linchpin that made this entire community-based revolution possible wasn't a new hospital protocol. It was actually a food science breakthrough. RUTF, ready-to-use therapeutic food. I mean, the most famous brand is Plumpy Nut. But I have to know, how did someone figure out that peanut butter was the answer to global starvation?
It was pioneered in the late 1990s by a French pediatric nutritionist named Dr. André Brand. He was desperately trying to find a way to make the F100 milk formula safe for home use. And he realized he had to remove water from the equation entirely. He supposedly looked at a jar of Nutella of all things and had an epiphany.
Okay, Nutella, that's amazing.
Yeah. RUTF is essentially an energy-dense, mineral and vitamin-enriched paste. It has almost the exact same nutritional profile as the F100 milk. It has milk powder, sugar, oil, and a massive dose of micronutrients. But the base is peanut paste instead of water.
Okay, the chemistry of that is fascinating. Because it's lipid-based, meaning it's made of oil and fat, it's biologically hostile to pathogens.
Right. It comes down to a concept called water activity. Bacteria and mold require free water molecules to multiply. RUTF has such a low water activity that even if a pathogen is introduced into the paste, it cannot reproduce. The bacteria just sit there, completely dormant, unable to form a colony.
That solves the refrigeration problem instantly.
No refrigeration required. It has a shelf life of up to 2 years. It requires zero preparation, no mixing, no boiling water, no sterilized cups. It comes in a rugged, foil-sealed packet. A mother simply tears off the corner and the child can suck the paste directly from the packet.
And if they don't finish it?
If the child only eats half, the mother can fold the foil over and give the rest later that day, even in a hut that is 100 degrees inside.
It's essentially biosecure space food for global public health. And the moment you introduce that packet into the equation, the entire architectural need for the hospital ward just vanishes. If a child doesn't have a severe secondary infection, they don't need a bed. They just need a stack of these packets and they can go home.
It was a true paradigm shift. But as you decentralize the treatment, you run headfirst into the next massive bottleneck: diagnosis.
Right, because if you are moving the front line of care out of the hospital and into thousands of remote villages, you don't have pediatricians sitting under every tree. You need a way for community health workers, volunteers, or even local parents to accurately diagnose a highly complex, lethal condition. And you can't just guess, you need hard data.
Exactly. The CMAM protocol relies on radical simplification. To diagnose the two forms of acute malnutrition we discussed earlier, the swelling of kwashiorkor and the wasting of marasmus, they stripped away the complex hospital machinery and standardized two incredibly simple, non-invasive tests.
Let's talk about the edema test first. How do you scientifically measure fluid retention in a field setting?
It's called the test for bilateral pitting edema, and it relies on basic fluid dynamics. The health worker applies firm pressure with their thumbs to the tops of both of the child's feet. They hold that pressure for 3 full seconds. We often teach them to count 1001, 1002, 1003. When they remove their thumbs, they look at the skin.
And what are they looking for?
If a distinct pit or indentation remains in the skin, it means the fluid in the tissues was pushed aside by the thumb and lacks the oncotic pressure to immediately rush back.
It's like pressing your finger into a piece of memory foam instead of a rubber ball. It just stays indented.
Exactly. But the key word is bilateral. The pit must be present in both feet. If it's only in one foot, the swelling isn't caused by systemic malnutrition. It might be a localized infection, a bug bite, or a sprained ankle.
Oh, that's clever. It filters out the noise.
Right. And if the bilateral pitting is confirmed, they use a grading system. Mild, or grade plus, means the pitting is isolated just to the feet. Moderate Grade 2 plus means the swelling has traveled up the lower legs or lower arms. And severe, grade 3 plus, indicates generalized swelling that has reached the face. It's a diagnosis of kwashiorkor, made in 3 seconds, using nothing but 2 thumbs.
Okay, so that covers the fluid retention. What about the wasting, the marasmus? Because in a modern hospital, to measure how underweight a child is, you'd use a digital scale and a measuring tape, right?
Yes, the traditional clinical metric is called weight for height, or WFH, and it is a logistical nightmare in a rural village setting. First, you need a highly calibrated scale. You have to convince a terrified mother to strip her sick child down to 0 clothes so the weight is totally accurate.
Which is awful for everyone involved.
Then you have to measure their length. For children under 2, you have to lay them flat on a heavy wooden measuring board. It usually requires 2 adults, one to hold the screaming child's head against the baseboard, and another to pin their knees down completely flat to slide the footpiece up.
Just picturing that. I mean, a hot, crowded village clinic, a terrified infant, a stressed mother. The margin for human error has to be massive.
It is entirely prone to error. If the scale is on uneven dirt, the weight is wrong. If the child bends their knees even slightly, the height is wrong. And even if you get perfect measurements, the health worker then has to take those 2 numbers and consult a complex grid of World Health Organization Z-score tables to calculate standard deviations.
Doing math in the field under pressure.
Exactly. If a worker misreads a column, they misdiagnose the child. The WFH system was fundamentally incompatible with mass community screening.
Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite public health innovations, the MUAC tape. MUAC, mid-upper arm circumference. This tiny piece of plastic is so elegant, it feels like it should be in an industrial design museum.
It is brilliant in its simplicity. It's a flexible, non-stretch plastic tape measure, but instead of relying on numbers or complex math, it's color-coded. A health worker finds the exact midpoint of the child's upper left arm, halfway between the tip of the shoulder and the tip of the elbow. They wrap the tape around that midpoint, making sure the child's arm is relaxed and hanging straight down.
And you have to get the tension right, too, from what I read. Like, it has to touch the skin all the way around, but you can't pull it tight enough to pinch the skin.
Right. You slide the end of the tape through a small slit, sort of like fastening a tiny belt. An arrow on the tape points to a specific color zone. For children between 6 months and 59 months of age, these color cutoffs are universally standard across the entire globe.
So what are the colors?
If the arrow points to the green zone, the arm circumference is over 125 millimeters. The child is not acutely malnourished. If it points to the yellow zone, which is between 150 and 125 millimeters, it indicates moderate acute malnutrition, or MERM.
And the danger zone, the red.
Red is any measurement under 115 millimeters. If that tape hits red, the child has severe acute malnutrition. They are in critical danger.
The moment I read about this, I realized the MUAC tape is basically a check engine light for human biology. You know, when your car's check engine light comes on, you don't need to be an ASE certified mechanic to know you have a problem. The light doesn't tell you if it's the catalytic converter or a spark plug. It just tells you that the system is failing and you need to pull over immediately. The tape does the exact same thing. But wait, I have to ask about the science here. For decades, the medical establishment insisted on the complex weight for height math. They thought the MUAC tape was too crude, right? How can measuring just one arm be as accurate as measuring the entire body's weight and length?
This is where the physiological genius of the tape comes in. Doctors used to prefer weight for height because it felt more mathematically precise. But large-scale data eventually revealed something startling. MUAC is actually a better predictor of a child's imminent mortality risk than weight for height.
How is that even possible?
Because of how the body stores and uses resources during starvation. Think about the anatomy of the upper arm. There's a bone, a layer of muscle, and a layer of subcutaneous fat. When a child enters that catabolic state of severe starvation we discussed earlier, the body rapidly strips away the fat and then aggressively breaks down the muscle mass in the limbs to feed the brain and organs.
Oh, I see. So it's measuring that specific breakdown.
Yes. A shrinking mid-upper arm circumference is a direct, localized proxy for a systemic muscle mass loss. And a critical loss of muscle mass correlates directly with an inability to mount an immune response to infectious diseases.
So a low weight for height might just mean a child is generally skinny or genetically small, like they're naturally light. But a red MUAC tape means their body is actively consuming its own muscles to survive.
Exactly. It specifically identifies the children who are actively dying. And because it only requires one single measurement, not a calculation, it strips away all that human error. You don't even need to be literate to use it. You just need to know the difference between green, yellow, and red.
Okay, so we have the diagnostic tools, we have the peanut paste. How does the actual system flow? Because the 2018 Fanta Guide lays out a very rigid, specific triage hierarchy. It divides the CAM framework into 4 pillars.
For the structural organization is what actually makes it work at scale. The first pillar is community outreach. This is the sociological engine, finding the children, mobilizing the villages, and breaking down cultural barriers. We are going to dive deep into how complex that outreach actually is in a moment. But let's assume the outreach works. A child is brought to a local health post. This triggers the clinical pathways.
The second pillar is outpatient care, and this is really the revolution we've been building up to.
Yes, outpatient therapeutic care. This pillar is designed specifically for children who have severe acute malnutrition, meaning a red MUAC tape, or bilateral pitting edema, but they do not have severe medical complications. They are alert, their breathing is normal, they aren't convulsing, and crucially, they pass the appetite test.
The guide hammers on this appetite test constantly. It seems like the single most important decision point in the entire protocol. What exactly is it?
It is the ultimate clinical gatekeeper. When a child with a red MUAC tape is brought to the clinic, the health worker doesn't just hand the mother a box of RUTF and wave goodbye. The mother is asked to watch her hands, sit in a quiet area, open a packet of RUTF, and offer a small amount to the child. The health worker observes them for a minimum of 30 minutes.
Half an hour just watching them eat?
Yes. If the child eats a specified minimum amount of the paste, they pass. If the child refuses to eat, gags, or spits it out repeatedly, they fail.
But why does that matter so much? I mean, sick kids are notoriously picky eaters. Maybe they just don't like the taste of peanuts.
It's not about being picky. It's about neurobiology and systemic infection. If a child is suffering from a severe hidden infection, perhaps advanced malaria or sepsis, or their liver function is so impaired that toxins are building up in their blood, their body chemically suppresses the appetite centers in the hypothalamus.
Oh, so the lack of hunger is a symptom of something way worse.
The lack of appetite is a glaring alarm bell that the child's internal systems are shutting down entirely. If they refuse to eat the RUTF, sending them home is a death sentence because they physically won't consume the medicine that will save them.
So it's an incredibly simple behavioral test that reveals deep physiological data. If they pass the appetite test, they go into outpatient care. What does that actually look like for the mother and child?
It's a managed weekly rhythm. The mother brings the child to the local clinic once a week. The health worker measures their MUAC and weight to ensure they are on an upward trajectory. And during the very first visit, the child receives a battery of routine medical interventions. The protocol mandates a broad-spectrum oral antibiotic, almost always amoxicillin.
Wait, even if they don't have a fever, why give antibiotics blindly like that?
Because in severe acute malnutrition, the immune system is so degraded that the body loses the ability to mount an inflammatory response. They might have a raging urinary tract infection or a severe gut infection, but they won't present with a fever or a cough. The amoxicillin sweeps the system for those hidden lethal pathogens.
That makes total sense. They just don't have the energy to fight it visibly.
Right. They also receive high-dose vitamin A, which is crucial for repairing the gut lining and the immune system, and later on deworming medication to clear out parasites that steal nutrients. Once the medical check is done, the mother is given a 1-week supply of RUTF packets and goes home.
And the data shows that 80% of all severe cases can be successfully treated in this outpatient pillar. That is a miraculous load taken off the fragile hospital system. But, 80% isn't 100%. Some kids are going to fail that appetite test.
Which is why Pillar 3 is absolutely vital. Pillar 3 is inpatient care. This is the safety net for the most critical cases. If a child has a red MUAC tape and they refuse to eat, or if they have a severe medical complication, intractable vomiting, hypothermia, severe pneumonia, or grade 3 extreme edema, they bypass the outpatient clinic entirely. They are urgently referred to a stabilization center, usually at a district hospital, for 24-hour care.
So we are back to the hospital, but the treatment there is very different from the outpatient model, right? Like, they don't just shove peanut paste down their throats.
No, RUTF would actually be incredibly dangerous for a complicated inpatient case. RUTF is very high in protein and sodium. If a child's liver and kidneys are actively failing, flooding their system with protein and sodium will cause their organs to completely shut down, leading to heart failure and death.
Wow, okay. So how do they feed them?
So in the inpatient phase, the sole goal is stabilization, not weight gain. The doctors treat the life-threatening infections with intravenous antibiotics, and they feed the child the F75 therapeutic milk we mentioned earlier. F75 is specifically formulated to be very low in protein and sodium and high in carbohydrates. It gently restarts the metabolic engine without overwhelming the organs.
It's like putting a fragile car in first gear. You don't floor the accelerator. You just want the engine to turn over.
Precisely. They stay in the hospital for a few days, maybe a week. Once the fever breaks, the severe edema starts to recede, and crucially, once their appetite returns and they can finally eat RUTF, they are immediately discharged.
They don't stay to get back to a normal weight.
No, they don't stay to regain weight. They're transferred down to Pillar 2, outpatient care, to finish their rehabilitation at home.
It's an incredibly fluid triage system. Outpatient handles the bulk, inpatient handles the critical spikes, and they feed back into each other seamlessly. What is the fourth pillar?
Pillar 4 is MAM management, dealing with moderate acute malnutrition. These are the children in the yellow zone of the MUAC tape. Their immune systems aren't collapsing yet, but they are on the precipice. Pillar 4 provides targeted supplementary feeding programs, often fortified blended flours, like corn-soy blend or smaller, less calorie-dense lipid supplements. It acts as a preventative safety net, catching the kids before they slide into the red zone and require intensive medical intervention.
Okay, I want to pivot here because to me, if you're listening to this, the logistics of the medicine, the RUTF, the MUAC tape, the amoxicillin, that's all brilliant. But a perfect medical protocol is completely useless if no one walks through the clinic door, or conversely, if 10,000 of the wrong people walk through the door and basically burn the clinic to the ground. That brings us back to Pillar 1, community outreach. And reading the source material, this is where public health completely collides with behavioral psychology and sociology.
Oh, it is the most delicate phase of the entire operation. The manual dedicates vast amounts of space to mapping out community dynamics before a single packet of RUTF is distributed. Because if you get the sociology wrong, the medicine fails. The guide highlights a fascinating tension regarding access and mobilization.
Let's play out a scenario to show this. Let's say a well-meaning NGO sets up a new CMAM clinic in a rural district. They want maximum coverage. They want to find every single malnourished child. So they drive a truck through all the local villages with a megaphone shouting, "We have free medicine and high-quality food at the clinic tomorrow for anyone who needs it." What happens?
Absolute chaos. You will have created a catastrophic bottleneck. The next morning, 500 mothers will show up, and the vast majority of them will be carrying children who are perfectly healthy or maybe just mildly stunted, but not in acute danger. They heard the words free food, and in an impoverished area, you would be irrational not to try and get some for your family.
So the clinic staff has to spend the entire day using the MUAC tape, screening 500 kids, only to realize like 480 of them are in the green zone.
And those 480 mothers have to be rejected. Put yourself in the shoes of one of those mothers. You woke up at dawn, you strapped your baby to your back, you walked 6 miles in the sweltering heat, you waited in a line for 5 hours. And finally, a health worker wraps a plastic tape around your child's arm, looks at you and says, "Sorry, your child isn't sick enough. Go home empty-handed."
She would be furious. She feels cheated.
She goes back to her village angry, and she tells every other mother she knows, "Do not bother going to that new clinic. They are liars. They make you wait all day and give you nothing." The program instantly acquires a toxic, resentful reputation in the community.
And the tragedy is, 3 weeks later, when a mother in that village genuinely has a child slipping into the red zone, a child who is actively dying, she doesn't take the child to the clinic. She heard it was a scam. So the program struck the absolute worst balance of access. They cast the net too wide, angered the community, and missed the target demographic entirely.
So the challenge is, how do you carefully tailor your messaging so that you invite only the people who are in critical danger without alienating the rest of the community? It requires intense cultural translation. The guide emphasizes that you never use clinical jargon. A mother in rural Zambia or Niger does not know what severe acute malnutrition is, but she knows the local vernacular. She knows what denjala means, or what the local word is for a child whose skin is peeling and whose feet are swollen.
The manual suggests developing localized handbills, like simple flyers or radio spots that focus entirely on the visual symptoms. Do you know a child who looks like an old man? Do you know a child whose feet leave a pit when you press them? We have a specialized cure just for them.
You are setting the expectation before they ever leave the house.
Exactly. You are communicating that this is a highly specific, restricted medical intervention, not a general food distribution. And speaking of that distinction, I noticed an incredibly shrewd behavioral tactic in the manual regarding how the health workers are trained to talk about the RUTF packets. They are strictly forbidden from calling it food, or a snack, or a biscuit. They must relentlessly brand it as medicine. Why go to such lengths to change the vocabulary? It's literally a peanut butter paste.
It comes down to cultural anthropology and the harsh realities of resource sharing in impoverished households. If a health worker hands a mother 20 packets of sweet, calorie-dense peanut paste and calls it food, what is the mother going to do?
Well, she probably has 4 other kids at home who are also starving. The socially correct maternal instinct is to split the food evenly among all her children.
Of course it is. But if she splits the sick child's dose 5 ways, the severely malnourished child is only receiving 20% of the daily calories required to repair their organs. The child will languish in the red zone and likely die. The program fails. But consider how people treat medicine. If a doctor gives you a bottle of liquid antibiotics for an ear infection, you don't pour a little bit into a cup for your healthy children, just to be fair.
No, of course not. Medicine is prescribed. It's only for the sick person.
Exactly. By heavily branding RUTF as a potent, specialized medicine that will only cure the child with the red arm, you tap into existing cultural rules around prescriptions. It creates a powerful psychological barrier to sharing within the household. The messaging ensures that caloric payload is delivered exactly where it is needed.
It's just brilliant behavioral design. Now, the 2018 manual also provides historical context by comparing different ways this outreach and clinic integration actually played out on the ground in the early days of CMAM. They highlight a stark contrast between an emergency response in Niger and an integrated response in Zambia. Can we dig into those logistics?
It's a perfect case study in the friction between speed and sustainability. So in 2005, the nation of Niger faced a massive, catastrophic nutrition emergency due to a combination of severe drought and a locust invasion that just destroyed crops. Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, launched a massive CMAM intervention. Because children were dying by the thousands, MSF didn't have the luxury of time. They opted for an emergency, mobile model.
What does that mean practically?
They essentially bypassed the slow, underfunded local Ministry of Health clinics. They set up their own vertical system. Tents, mobile distribution sites, fleets of land cruisers driving RUTF directly into the desert.
And the clinical results were incredible, right?
Astounding. They treated over 60,000 severely malnourished children in a matter of months, and the mortality rate was kept under 5%. It proved to the world that decentralized RUTF distribution worked on a massive scale as a logistical triumph.
But I feel like there's a huge but coming here.
The but is what happens when the emergency ends. MSF is an emergency response NGO. Eventually, the funding shifts, the crisis stabilizes, and the foreign doctors pack up their tents and leave. Because they ran a parallel system, the local Nigerian Ministry of Health was never fully trained or integrated into the process. The local clinics didn't have the supply chains for RUTF. When the NGO left, a massive vacuum remained. It was fast, but it wasn't deeply sustainable.
Contrast that with what happened in Zambia around the exact same time.
Right. In Lusaka, Zambia, an organization called Valid International took the opposite approach. They decided to work horizontally. From day one, they integrated the CM protocol directly into the existing government-run district clinics. They didn't bring in an army of foreign doctors. They spent months and months training the local Zambian nurses and community health workers.
I imagine that was an incredibly frustrating, messy process compared to just driving a Land Cruiser in.
It was plagued with bureaucratic friction. They faced severe staff shortages because local nurses were already completely overworked. They ran into agonizing supply chain issues, trying to get RUTF through standard government customs and into local medical storerooms. The rollout was agonizingly slow compared to Niger.
But it lasted.
But the long-term payoff was immense.
Yes.
Because they wove the CM protocol into the actual DNA of the local health system, it survived. It wasn't a flash-in-the-pan emergency response. It became a permanent routine public health service that the local government owned and operated for decades.
The manual seems to suggest that the future of CM lies in pushing that integration even further. And this section of the text introduces a concept that genuinely blew my mind. It's called the Mother MUAC approach.
Yes, this is perhaps the most profound evolution in the entire CM framework over the last decade. Traditionally, to run the community outreach pillar, an NGO or a government would train a cadre of formal community health workers, CHWs. These workers would walk from village to village, knocking on doors using the MUAC tape to screen children.
Which obviously takes a ton of time and money.
It's a massive logistical burden. A CHW might only be able to visit a remote household once a month or once every 2 months. A child's nutritional status can crash from green to red in 2 weeks if they catch malaria.
So the screening frequency is way too low. How do they solve it?
Well, around 2011, an organization called Alima, operating in Niger, asked a radical, almost heretical question. If the MUAC tape is just a plastic band with colors, why are we paying health workers to walk for miles to use it? Why don't we just give a tape to every single mother and teach her to do it herself?
Okay, put yourself in the shoes of a trained medical professional for a second. You spent years in school. You operate on rigorous protocols. And now someone suggests that you should hand your primary diagnostic tool over to a parent who might not have any formal schooling and trust them to monitor a lethal disease. That has to terrify the medical establishment.
Oh, it was met with intense skepticism. Doctors assumed mothers would panic, or they wouldn't understand the tension required to wrap the tape, or they would misread the colors, leading to thousands of false referrals, completely overwhelming the clinics. But Alima ran massive clinical trials. They trained thousands of mothers to use the tape and check for foot edema, and the results completely dismantled that medical elitism.
How accurate were the mothers?
They were found to be non-inferior to trained community health workers. Their sensitivity and specificity were well over 90%. They were just as accurate as the professionals.
That is staggering. And when you think about the frequency advantage, I mean, a mother bathes her child, holds her child, feeds her child every single day.
Exactly. If the child's arm slips from the yellow zone into the red zone on a Tuesday, the mother catches it on a Wednesday. She doesn't have to wait 3 weeks for a health worker to randomly show up. The mother MUAC approach catches malnutrition weeks earlier, long before those dangerous medical complications set in. The child is healthier, the recovery is faster, and it requires fewer RUTF packets to actually cure them.
And the economic data in the manual is wild. They ran a cost-benefit analysis, and they estimated that training a mother to use the tape, including the cost of the plastic tape itself, costs about $1 per child per year.
A single dollar.
$1 to effectively put a diagnostic expert inside every single home.
It is the ultimate decentralization. But beyond the economics, think about the psychological shift here. In the old hospital model, a mother was a passive, terrified recipient of care. She handed her dying baby to a doctor and just hoped for the best. With Mother MUAC, the mother is fiercely empowered. She is the active guardian of her child's health data. It fundamentally democratizes the power dynamic of healthcare.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time talking about children aged 6 to 59 months, because that is the demographic the MUAC tape is calibrated for, and it's where the vast majority of the data lies. But as I read the final sections of the 2018 manual, I realized there is a massive demographic we are ignoring. What about the absolute youngest? The tiny infants under 6 months old? Because this update introduces a radical shift in how this demographic is handled. They call it the MAMI framework.
Yes, MAMI. Stands for Management of At-Risk Mothers and Infants Under 6 Months. For decades, this tiny demographic was the glaring blind spot in global nutrition protocols. The prevailing assumption was that an infant under 6 months was just too fragile, and their biology too complex, to be handled in a community outpatient setting. If a 2-month-old was failing to thrive, the default rule was basically send them to the inpatient hospital.
But the data in this new guide admits that approach was failing horribly.
It was. Infant mortality in the inpatient wards remained unacceptably high, and mothers of young infants face even steeper barriers to leaving their homes for long hospital stays. The 2018 guidelines represent a profound realization that we were looking at the problem entirely wrong.
The first thing that struck me in the MAM section is a deliberate, almost philosophical shift in vocabulary. The authors explicitly state they do not want to use the term acute malnutrition for infants under 6 months. Instead, they mandate the phrase nutrition vulnerability.
Why change the words? Are we just softening the language?
Not at all. It's about clinical accuracy. When you measure a 2-year-old with an MUAC tape, the physics of muscle wasting are clear. But for a neonate or a 2-month-old infant, anthropometric measurements like weight and length are highly variable and often incredibly misleading.
Well, for example, an infant might weigh very little and look tiny. But perhaps they were born prematurely or with a low birth weight. They might actually be growing perfectly well along their own unique developmental curve. Conversely, an infant might have a completely normal weight on a chart today, but they've stopped gaining weight entirely over the last week. They are secretly crashing. Nutrition vulnerability captures a dynamic state of risk rather than just a static snapshot of their size.
And the most profound paradigm shift in the MAM framework is how they define the patient. The manual emphatically states that you cannot treat the infant alone. The patient is actually the mother-infant pair.
Biologically, an infant under 6 months is not an independent entity. Their entire physiological survival system is inextricably linked to their mother's body, her breast milk production, and her behavioral cues. If an infant is failing to thrive, the intervention almost never starts by looking at the baby. It starts by intensely assessing the mother.
The text provides a triage tool for this, called the CMAMI tool. And looking at it, it is a remarkably holistic, exhaustive checklist. It doesn't just ask, is the baby skinny? It forces the health worker to become a lactation consultant, a therapist, and a social worker all at once. It goes deep into the mechanical realities of breastfeeding.
It breaks down the mechanics because that is often where the failure cascade begins. The health worker is instructed to physically observe a feeding session. They look at the attachment. Is the baby's mouth wide open? Is the chin touching the breast? Are there slow, deep sucks and audible swallowing? Or is the baby just shallowly pacifying without getting milk?
And they check the frequency too, right?
Yes, they assess the frequency. Is the mother feeding at least 8 to 10 times in a 24-hour period, including at night, when prolactin levels are highest?
And they check the mother's physical health for barriers. Are there signs of severe engorgement, painful mastitis, or cracked nipples that make feeding absolute agony for her? But where the CMAMI tool truly surprised me, where I think it becomes genuinely groundbreaking, is its intense focus on maternal mental health.
Oh, yes. The protocol recognizes that biology and psychology are not separate domains. The health worker is instructed to actively screen for severe depression, acute anxiety, or trauma. They ask deeply personal questions. In the last few weeks, have you been feeling sad or hopeless? Do you find it difficult to carry out daily tasks? They even ask if the mother is experiencing domestic abuse or physical harm from a partner in the home.
How does that connect to the infant's weight, though? I mean, I understand a depressed mother might be distracted, but does it actually affect the milk itself?
It absolutely affects the biology of lactation. Milk production is governed by 2 hormones, prolactin, which makes the milk, and oxytocin, which causes the milk letdown reflex, literally pushing it out of the ducts. Severe psychological stress, trauma, or the constant terror of domestic abuse floods the mother's system with cortisol and adrenaline.
And what do those stress hormones do?
These stress hormones actively inhibit the release of oxytocin. A traumatized mother might have breasts full of milk, but her body physically will not release it to the baby. The tap is shut off. Furthermore, severe postpartum depression drastically reduces a mother's behavioral capacity to respond to the subtle, early hunger cues of her infant, leading to fewer feeding sessions and a downward spiral of her milk supply.
It reminds me of the classic airplane safety briefing.
Yeah.
In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, secure your own oxygen mask before assisting others. If the mother's physical or mental health is in a state of collapse, the infant's life support system is fundamentally offline. You can't just hand the baby a medicine dropper. You have to put the oxygen mask on the mother first.
That is the exact philosophy. And because an infant under 6 months cannot digest the peanut-based RUTF, their kidneys and gut are way too immature to handle that heavy protein and fat load, the outpatient treatment is entirely different from the older kids. The treatment is intense, weekly counseling and maternal support.
What does that support actually look like if the mother has stopped producing milk entirely?
It often involves relactation therapy. The health worker teaches the mother techniques for frequent, intense nipple stimulation and skin-to-skin contact to send nerve impulses back to the pituitary gland, basically tricking the brain into restarting prolactin production. It's a slow, grueling process.
And what if the mother isn't there?
Right, if the mother is absent, deceased, or completely unable to lactate, the intervention looks to the community. It might involve finding a safe wet nurse within the extended family, which carries its own complex cultural hurdles and HIV screening requirements, of course. Or, as an absolute last resort, it involves providing safe breast milk substitutes. But that brings us right back to the terrifying danger of contaminated water in the village.
And for the mental health side, the treatment is community integration. The manual stresses linking the mother to local psychosocial support groups.
It is treating the social environment as a literal medical intervention. If a mother is isolated, traumatized, and her stress hormones are blocking her milk, writing a prescription for a pill won't fix it. Getting her into a circle of other mothers, providing a safe space to talk, reducing her isolation, that is a life-saving pediatric prescription for her baby. The MAMI framework represents the absolute highest level of integrated public health. It demands that we view a human being not as a spreadsheet of vital signs, but as a fragile node in a complex web of family, community, and psychological realities.
It's just breathtaking how much is packed into this framework. So let's step back and summarize the incredible architectural journey we've taken through this 2018 training guide. We started with a devastating, lethal biological reality, acute malnutrition, the wasting and the swelling that actively threatens tens of millions of children's lives globally.
The sheer scale of it is hard to comprehend.
We saw how the medical establishment's original answer was centralized hospitals, and we saw how the logistics of that approach completely crushed the system and the mothers who relied on it.
They realized centralization was the enemy of scale. So they dismantled the hospital model, they replaced it with the CMAM framework. It required a scientific breakthrough, inventing a water-free medicine, RUTF, that could sit on a dirt floor in a hot hut and remain perfectly safe.
And it required a diagnostic breakthrough, adopting a simple, color-coded plastic tape that was so inherently foolproof a mother could use it in her own home with clinical accuracy.
Right, and they built a flowing triage system that kept 80% of patients out of the hospital entirely, treating them in their own villages, which conserved the intensive care beds only for those who truly desperately needed them.
And they achieved all of this by mastering the messy sociology of outreach, using local languages, carefully controlling the behavioral messaging around what is a medicine versus a food, and ultimately viewing the mother and the infant not as separate patients, but as an inseparable biological and psychological unit of care.
And, if you are listening to this, regardless of what field you work in, if you build software, you manage corporate logistics, or you design educational curriculums, or you are an executive trying to scale a business, the CAM model is an absolute masterclass in system design.
It really is.
It answers the ultimate scaling question. How do you take a highly complex, fiercely guarded, centralized process and successfully decentralize it? You don't do it by building more hospitals. You do it by designing tools that are so elegant they eliminate human error, and by fiercely empowering your end users. In this case, those end users were mothers in some of the most remote, under-resourced villages on Earth, and empowering them saved millions of lives.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to ponder. We've seen how the medical establishment was initially terrified to hand over diagnostic power to untrained mothers, assuming they weren't capable, only to find out those mothers were perfectly capable of using a simple colored tape to expertly monitor their own children's survival.
So, if empowering communities with simplified tools can completely revolutionize global nutrition, what else is out there? That's the big question.
What other highly complex, fiercely guarded interventions in medicine, in the legal system, in finance, are currently locked up inside metaphorical hospitals, controlled by gatekeepers, just waiting to be radically simplified and handed back to the people?
It makes you wonder how many complicated, expensive X-ray machines we are relying on right now, when a simple, well-designed plastic tape might actually do the job infinitely better.
Sometimes the muddy waters aren't so muddy once you give the people the right compass to navigate them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.